Hello, welcome to another session of Digital Forensics and Investigation. In the previous session, we discussed the advantages and disadvantages of the open source tool. We also discussed Linux as a platform for the digital investigations. We discussed some Linux tools for image acquisitions and analysis. For example, data dump, the sleuth kit, and loopback interface. In this session, we will discuss the live forensic process, including the soundness of the forensics process, requirements for building a live forensics toolkit, and how to test it, and some freely available toolkits and the volatility order. In live forensics, it is necessary to know that which artifacts are most volatile and which are least volatile. But of course, this depends on case to case. We will also discuss general methodology to know what to do and what not to do in the live forensic acquisition process. And in the end, we will see the memory extraction and analysis tools. So, a live data acquisition method is used when a suspect's computer cannot be shut down to perform a static acquisition. The captured data might be altered during the acquisition because it is not write protected. Also, live acquisitions are not repeatable because the suspect's computer's operating system is continuously altering data. So, to be useful in the digital investigation, digital evidence must be preserved and examined in a forensically sound manner. So, some practitioners of the digital forensic think that a method of preserving or examining digital evidence is only forensically sound if it does not alter the original evidence source in any way. But this is simply not true. In digital forensic, the routine task of acquiring data from a hard drive, even when using the hardware write blocker, alters the original state of the hard drive. So such alterations can introduce making a hidden area of the hard drive accessible or uploading or updating information maintained by the self-monitoring analysis and reporting technologies on some modern hard drives. So most methods of acquiring the content of the memory on a live computer systems and mobile devices alter or overwrite a portion of the memory. But this is generally accepted practice in digital forensics live acquisition. So setting an absolute standard that dictates that preserve everything but change nothing is not only inconsistent with some other forensic discipline, but is also dangerous in a legal context. So meeting the requirements of such standards may be impossible in some circumstances. Therefore, considering this standard as a best practice can open digital evidence to criticism that have no bearing on the issues under investigations. So now it is clear that whenever you will do live forensics, you will cause some changes to the system. And this is because you will run a program, and when it will run, it will start a lot of processes. And that might change the registry or add, delete, or overwrite some files. So you might, even if you might be creating a network connections or closing a network connections or sometime transmitting over the network connections, there will be changes to the RAM. Okay. So now, how will you answer this question that are we allowed to do some changes to a file or delete them? So the answer to this is it depends on the situations and competencies of the investigator in live forensic acquisition. So in static forensics, this is not allowed. But in live forensics, that could happen. And we have seen this in the previous slide that running a program can make changes to the evidence. But still, it is desirable to keep everything in its original form as much as possible. So one of the keys to forensic soundness is documentation. So a solid case is built on the supporting documentation that reports on where the evidence originated and how it was handled. So from a forensic standpoint, the acquisition process should change the original evidence as little as possible, and any changes should be documented and assessed in the context of final analytical results. So if it is considered that the acquisition process preserves a complete and accurate representation of the original data, its authenticity and integrity can be validated. And actually, it proves that the process is forensically sound. So, also, when preserving volatile data, digital investigators must document the date and time when data were preserved, what tools were used during the acquisition process, and the MD5 hash values of all the data and files. So when dealing with the computers, it is critical to record the date and time of a computers and then compare it to a reliable time source. The APCO guideline says that not even a single action taken by the law enforcement agencies or investigator should change the data that is held on the computer or any storage device, which may be presented in the court as a trusted evidence. But in exceptional circumstances, the investigator can alter data when the investigator finds it's extremely important to access the original data held on that computer or on that storage device. So in that case, the investigator must be competent to do so and must be able to give evidence explaining the relevance and the implications of their actions. The APCO guideline also says that an audit trail or other record of all processes applied to the computer-based electronic evidence should be created and preserved so that an independent third party should be able to examine those processes to achieve the same results. Now, the person in charge of the investigation, also known as the case officer, has the overall responsibility to ensure that all the procedures are correctly followed and documented. Okay, so when conducting a live investigation, timestamps are considered the most important part in the computer forensic world. So while you are taking all the reasonable steps to preserve the timestamps, it is equally important to know that most of the network operating systems constantly perform some sort of background processes. So whether it is populating the network folder, responding to some request from the other network system, performing some scheduled backup, or running a virus scan, a Windows system is always doing something. So the timestamps of those files will frequently be changing, whether the forensic examiner is touching a keyboard, moving mouse, or simply looking at the computer from a distance. So the mission of the investigator is to preserve and collect evidence. Destroying a potentially crucial evidence in RAM just to preserve the timestamp is not necessarily a wise trade-off. So you must always think that what is the advantages and disadvantages before pulling the power plug out of from the target system. Remember that you should never run a tool that are stored on the victim computers. So files on the compromised or the victim computer may have been replaced by Trojans or rootkits that could hide the hacker's presence or even initiate a destructive program on the victim system. So wherever and when possible, bring your own tools to the crime scene, which is under investigation. So many agencies recommend carrying your own live analysis tools on your USB drive. So the analysis tools can be run from the USB drive, and the output can be redirected to the same USB drive and save on it as an evidence. So this method certainly does work, but the act of like inserting a USB drive into a USB port on any Windows systems involves like activating the plug and play services, hardware installation wizard, and possibly a virus scanning utility, and maybe some other services. So simply by inserting a USB drive, you will cause numerous timestamps to be altered and even cause changes to some registry files. So this is not necessarily an investigative problem. So if there are less intrusive ways to gather the same evidence, then you should consider them. Again, it will be up to the investigator on the scene to make the final decisions, but what trade-off should be made when using the various techniques to gather the evidence. So for this, you must know about the software and the hardware specifications of the victim machines, and based on that, prepare your own toolkit for the live investigation. So, what are the basic requirements to build a toolkit? Of course, the most important one is it must not alter any files or any associated metadata on the suspected machine. And this can be achieved by testing every command of the toolkit during its development process and carefully observing its behavior. For example, what file it takes as an input, which location it accesses, and where it stores the output file, and to see whether it does some changes to anything or not. If it does changes, then do not use that command in your live forensic toolkit. Only use those commands that should not do any changes to any file or to any associated metadata. So whenever you use a live forensic CD or a USB disk on a suspected machine, you must be sure that the executable on the live forensic USB that how it would behave and whether it is according to the APCO guidelines. So the initial requirement of not to alter any files on a victim machines are becoming impossible. And in that case, we must try to keep this alteration as little as possible. Now, one of the most cost-effective and fastest method of performing live analysis is to create a series of live analysis compact disks. These compact disks or CDs would contain the software needed to recover the majority of the evidence that a network intrusion investigator or the live forensic investigator would need to properly process victims' computer memory. So these CDs would contain not only the trusted copies of the common analysis tool, but also the shared dynamic libraries on which these tools rely. And the shared dynamic libraries are the DLL files. So these CDs should not be confused with the boot CDs, which can be used to boot an offline systems into an operating system which is controlled by the investigator. As you know that DLL resides on the systems and are available for the application programmer to access through a specified APIs. So most code that runs on the Windows systems relies on those DLL files. And for example, the commands such as netstat and task list that can be imported in analyzing evidence in a RAM of a victim systems also rely on systems DLL to perform their functions. If attacker has a complete control of a system, it is possible that he or she has also replaced the standard system DLL file with the version that are designed to hide his or her presence on the victim's machine. To minimize both the risk of the maliciously modified file generated wrong results and the impact on the timestamps of various files on a hard disk, it is recommended that you do not rely on tools or commands that will utilize those potentially compromised DLLs of a victim machine. Also, collecting evidence from a RAM of a live forensic requires specific knowledge of the environment to which you will be responding. So you must check what is the operating system. Like, for example, is it a Windows XP, Windows Server, Windows Vista, Windows Server 2008? If so, then which service pack? Is it a 32-bit or 64-bit architecture? So the answer to these questions will have a direct impact on what tools you need to select to acquire a volatile storage. So some tools cannot access RAM's data on the 64-bit system. And the reason is 64-bit system uses a different memory addressing structure than their 32-bit counterpart. Similarly, other tools might only be able to access RAMs on a specific operating system. Shared libraries are considered as a reusable piece of code that can be dynamically loaded into an application. So these files are generally stored on the disk with .so extension in the Linux operating systems and can be thought of as a counterpart to the DLL files on Windows. So due to the power of shared libraries, attackers and malware will often inject shared libraries into the processes to steal data or to escalate the privileges rights. So in a nutshell, there is a need of thorough research in selecting your toolkit. Test them thoroughly and choose them very wisely. So RAM is considered as an extremely volatile part of of the computer system. So you must execute the successful execution in one go, in one step. Okay. So the tools you select must be reliable and produce the smallest footprint possible to prevent excessive swapping to the system file pages, which introduces all kinds of other issues such as increasing the possibility of overwriting data in some unallocated clusters of the hard drive. Okay. So the process monitor is an advanced monitoring tool for Windows that shows real-time file system, registry, and process activities or thread activities. It combines the feature of two legacy sysinternals utilities, which are FileMon and RegMon, and adds an extensive list of enhancements, including the non-destructive filtering, comprehensive event properties such as session IDs and username, reliable process informations, full thread stacks with integrated symbols, support for each operations, simultaneous logging to files, and many more. So the process monitor monitors and records all actions attempted against the Microsoft Windows registry. Process monitor can be used to detect failed attempts to read and write registry keys. So it records the executable file's interactions with the computer as well. Okay, so there are like certain procedures to test a file using the process monitor to see its dependencies. So the first step is to run a process monitor and leave it for a while. So when the system will become stable, so you will see that what are the files that the system Windows operating system is accessing or which are running on the system. Check the report when that system becomes stable and idle. Once the system becomes stable, then you need to go and run the Live Forensics Toolkit or any command that you will be using in the Live Forensic Toolkit. And by running that command or that toolkit, you will see some changes to the process monitor screen. And when you see that, stop monitoring the processes monitor and determine the DLL and other dependencies files that is needed for the live response toolkit using the dependency walker or MyTech executable or PEView, etc. So here is the screenshot of the MyTech Explorer, which is actually looking for the dependencies of PsLoggedon executable. So when the MyTech was running, after that PsLoggedon executable is executed, and it captured all the DLL files that were needed for the PsLoggedon. So you can see that PsLoggedon needs 7 DLL files to access on the operating system. The same results can be achieved by using a dependency walker. So when dependency walker was running and the PsLoggedon executable was executed, again it captured the same DLL files that were needed for the PsLoggedon to run on a system. Okay, so the general procedure to test live forensics toolkits on Windows includes copy all those files that tool depends on in a live response toolkit repository or directory. Repeat the testing process until the tool does not open any file directly from the victim's computer. Also, document any changes made during the live forensic process or response that you can export from the process monitor. The idea is to bundle the tools with their dependencies if possible and keep them on your live response toolkit, which will be located on in the USB or on a compact disk. So this procedure actually ensures that we use trusted executable and dependencies when we perform a live acquisition instead of using code from the victim systems, which could have been infected by the malware or compromised by the suspect. So it is recommended to rename your Live Forensics Toolkit executable to distinguish them from those on the system and avoid accidentally running malicious executable with the same name. For example, F port can be renamed as T underscore F port, where T underscore indicates that this is a trusted version in your toolkit. Okay, so the next is to develop a script to drive the live forensic response process. So a script enables us to reduce the number of commands executed by the investigators, as most of the commands are written within that script. It also provides a history of commands executed in case it is called into question later on by by the investigator or in a court. So a script is usually placed in a live repository directory. Okay. So in Linux, most tools have their source code available and hence they can be statically compiled. However, it must be noted that this type of compilation make each executable a lot larger than its dynamic counterpart. But there is the advantage of the static compilation because it creates an executable that does not require the dependencies from the operating system. So in Linux, dependencies can be checked using LDD command. For example, to check the dependencies of lsblk file, so it can be checked using LDD space lsblk. So it will give us the dependencies of the lsblk file command. So here we first look for the lsblk using the whereas command. So whereas will tell us the exact path where this lsblk file is located. So you can see that it is located in the bin directory in this case. So now to check its dependency, we will use the ldd command and it shows that it has 4 dependency files. Similarly, to know the dependencies of a netstat, we will follow the same procedure. First locate its path and then use the ldd command to know its dependencies. So when we do that, so we can see that netstat has 2 dependency files. Okay, there is a wide range of digital forensics software products in the market today. So some of them are journal tools that serve a variety of functions. Others are more focused and specific, serving a fairly limited purposes. So these applications tend to focus on a very specific type of evidence, for example, email or the internet. So when selecting a software, a choice needs to be made between among going with the open source tool or commercially produced products. So there are advantages and disadvantages of both. Factors such as cost, functionality, capabilities, and support are some of these criteria that can be used to make this decision. Some of the open source tools include SIFT, which is Science Investigation Forensic Toolkit, DEFT, which is a Digital Evidence and Forensic Toolkit, and ADIA, which is Appliance for Digital Investigation and Analysis. So one of the most popular open source tool is SIFT or Science Investigative Forensic Toolkit. So SIFT Workstation is a powerful free open source tool. It is built on the Linux Ubuntu operating system, and this tool is capable of file carving as well as analyzing file systems, web history, recycle bin, and many more locations. So it can also analyze network traffic and volatile memory such as RAM. It can also generate a timeline, which can be very helpful during the investigation process. So SIFT supports various operating systems like Windows, Mac, Solaris, Linux, etc. The Linux distribution DEFT is made up of the Linux and Dart, and it is a suite dedicated to the digital forensics and intelligence activity. The most important tools and packages found in DEFT includes file manager with disk mount status, full support for BitLocker encrypted disk, the sleuth kit, digital forensic framework, full support for the Android and iOS logical acquisitions, Skype extractor, and many more. DEFT 0 is considered as a light version and comes with fewer set of these tools, which are installed on DEFT 0. Password recovery and mobile forensic tools are not available by default on DEFT 0. So DEFT is a very professional and stable system that includes excellent hardware detection and best free open source applications dedicated to incident response, cyber threat intelligence, and many other computer forensics and investigation areas. DEFT is meant to be used by military, the police, and private security professionals, IT auditors, and by the individuals as well. The next is the Appliance for Digital Investigation and Analysis (RDA). So it is a VMware-based appliance used for digital investigation and acquisition, and is built entirely from the public domain software. So among the tools contained in IDEA are Autopsy, the Sleuth Kit, Digital Forensic Framework, Log2 Timeline, and Wireshark. And most of the system maintenance use Webmin. So it is designed for small to medium-sized digital investigation and acquisition processes. The appliance runs under the Linux, Windows, and Mac operating system, and both 32-bit and 64-bit versions are available of this idea. Okay, the inspection of the available digital evidence source can help the digital investigator to prioritize the preservations effort based on the volatility and importance of the data. The measures of digital investigators takes that actually the investigator takes the main aim is to preserve the digital evidence, and it will depend upon the type of the evidence, the severity of the crime scenes, and also the importance of the evidence to the investigation. In some situation, it is sufficient to take the print screen and make a copy of a selected information from a server. But in other situations, such as when there are too many files to copy from individual computers, or computer contains deleted data that are very crucial to the case, it becomes necessary to preserve the entire computer that contains that material. So the challenge that investigators face is the order of volatility, which determines how long a piece of information lasts on a system. For example, data in RAM or running processes might exist for only a few milliseconds. Other data, such as files which are stored on a hard drive, that might last for years. So attempts have been made to rank the type of data on a computer system and storage devices from most to the least volatile. So this is sometimes called as order of volatility. And it is a reasonable question to ask, why are non-volatile storage locations present in the order of volatility? The reason is that no form of the storage is permanent. Even storage media such as CDs or disk tapes that will fail over time and can subject to the damage if not stored in a proper environmental conditions, and that could still be considered as to have some sort of or some level of the volatility. So everything in the list shown here that is traditionally considered volatile is stored either in a memory or in the temporary storage locations on the computer chip. All these locations rely primarily on the continuous power to maintain the availability and integrity of the data stored within that location. So when the power is removed from the device, all data in those locations will eventually be lost. So the following step shows the general procedures for our live acquisitions. Although Investigator differs on exact step, but these are the some procedures that are considered more common among the investigation. For example, take an image of the system memory, run a trusted shell, then document the system's date and time and compare it with some trusted source, time source. Also, note down the host name, username, system status, and also the environmental details. There is also a need to see and identify who has logged into the systems. Also inspect the network connections and open ports and running processes on that victim machines. And also examine different services and drivers on that systems. If there is any open files, there is also a need to check and inspect those open files. So memory acquisition, which is also known as capturing, damping, or sampling, involves copying the content of a volatile memory to a non-volatile storage. There is no doubt one of the most important and risky steps in the memory forensic process. So RAM is considered volatile memory because it requires power for the data to remain accessible. So after the PC is turned off, the data in the volatile memory is lost and it cannot be recovered when the PC is powered on again. So therefore, if you plan to preserve the evidence regarding the system's current state, then incident response tactics, which is pull the plug, is not recommended in the live digital acquisition process. Okay. Now this list shows the commonly used memory acquisitions tool. Of course, these are not in order. So as you have seen in your first lab, we use the FTK images for memory acquisitions. So this tool supports the acquisition of many types of data, including RAM. So Access Data also sells a pre-configured live response USB toolkits that require physical memory in addition to chat log, network connections, and many more. In case or when n is also the acquisition tools from Guardian software that can dump memory in a compressed format and records metadata in the headers. WinPMemp is the only open source memory acquisition tool for Windows. It includes the capabilities to output files in a raw dump format, choose between the various acquisition methods, and expose physical memory through a device for live analysis on a local system. Linux Memory Extractor, also known as LIME, is the latest Linux memory acquisition tool. Lime operates by loading a kernel driver and all acquisition is done within the kernel. So this significantly enhances the accuracy of the resulting sample because there are no context switching between the user land and the kernel required to transfer data. Lime is a loadable kernel module (LKM) which allows the acquisition of volatile memory from the Linux and Linux-based devices such as those powered by Android. So Lime is a unique in that it is the first tool that allows full memory capture from Android devices. It also minimizes its interaction between user and kernel space processes during the acquisitions, which allows it to produce memory capture that are more forensically sound than those of the other tools which are designed for the Linux memory acquisition. Linux Memory Grabber is a tool to create Linux volatility profile and dump memory using Lime from a USB key without the need of installation on the local hard drive. The Volatility Framework is a completely open collection of tools implemented in Python under the GNU General Public License. Analysts use volatility for the extraction of digital artifacts from the volatile memory samples, like RAM samples. Because volatility is open source and free to use, you can download the framework and begin performing advanced analysis immediately without paying a single penny. Also, volatility analyzes memories from a 32 and 64-bit Windows, Linux, Mac systems, and even 32-bit Android. So volatility's modular design is also very good because it allows the developer to easily support new operating systems and architect whenever they are released. But it should be keep in mind that it is not a memory acquisition tool. Volatility does not acquire memory from a target system. You acquire memory with one of the tools which were mentioned previously and then analyze it with the utility. An exception is when you connect to a live forensic, a live machine, or any firewire connections and use Volatility's image copy plugin to dump a RAM to an output file. In that case, you are, we can say, essentially acquiring a memory. With every major release, volatility is distributed in several formats, including a standalone Windows executable, a Windows Python module installer, and a source code packages. So user typically choose which format to download based on the host operating system and the type of the activities that they intend to perform with that framework, such as simply using it to analyze the memory dump or for the development and integration with some external tools. So standalone Windows executable is the quickest and easiest way to start using volatilities on Windows analysis machines. The executable includes a Python interpreter and all volatility dependencies. There is no need of installation. Just launch the executable from the command prompt. You can also run the executable directly from a removable media such as the USB drives. So which runs the volatility into a portable utility that you can take with you for any remote investigation, where you will not be allowed to bring your own laptop, for example. So in the past, many people have also written scripts to automate the collection of data from standalone executable by redirecting its output to text files. Rekall is an advanced forensic and incident response framework. Although it was purely designed as a memory forensic framework, it has now evolved into a complete platform. So Rekall implements the most advanced analysis techniques in the field while still being developed in the open with a free and open source license. Rekall strives to be a complete end-to-end memory analysis framework, encapsulating acquisitions, analysis, and reporting. Rekall is the only memory analysis platform specifically designed to run on the same platform which it is analyzing. So the live analysis allows us to validate memory artifacts with the results obtained through Systems API. Rekall is the only open source memory analysis tool that can work with Windows, page files, and map files. Rekall also includes a full acquisition solution which allows the acquisition of page files and all relevant mapped files. One of the major goals of the Rekall is to make it possible to embed Rekall as a library. So to make a Rekall library friendly, a suspension or the progress API where Rekall can inform callers about its progress is usually added. So Rekall also has a support for customized output format, and one of the most useful format is a JSON-based data export format. The Rekall has an advanced GUI which allows the analyst to create a report merging markup text, images, embedded files, as well as output of the Rekall plugins to in the same documents. So Rekall output then presents useful actions menu, which helps to drive the analyst to drill down into the different objects which were found. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this sessions. Thank you very much for your attention.